So I've asked Betty to introduce Tanya. In our few minutes together, I'm already entranced, so I can't wait for your presentation.
I'm Barbara's matchmaker.
You are.
Well, you all received Tanya's bio, so I won't go into her many residencies and exhibitions, but I'm going to talk a little, for a few minutes about how lucky I was to have met Tanya, because I truly believe in karma. And here was a woman who was already well into her pregnancy, was doing some work at the School of the Art Institute, and my former professor there knew that I was working on an exhibition, and he suggested that Tanya get in touch with me because there just might be something that she could get involved with. Well, she was most brilliant help I could have, because she condensed all my catalog entries into those fabulously readable labels that we see next to each painting. And in the middle of it all, with a difficult pregnancy, she ended up being hospitalized, and sadly missed the opening of the exhibition, where I would have said all these wonderful things about her then too. But we have been friends ever since. And I only met her in that capacity initially. I knew she was an artist. But then soon after that, she had an exhibition at a gallery on Wabash. And I said, I got to go see what this woman does. And I went to this exhibition, and that was it. I knew that someday I had to have Tanya's work in something that I was going to curate. And that happened last year at the Sundram Tagore Gallery. And most of you saw the presentation that I did earlier in our Salon season about that, which is what encouraged me, based on your response to Tanya's work, to invite her to speak today. And with that, my good friend, my colleague, Tanya Gill.
Thank you, Betty. Like making me teary.
Oh, honey.
Well, it was definitely good fortune both ways. I've been so grateful for all of your support. Thank you, Betty. All right, so based on the work that Betty did put in the exhibition of mine, in her exhibition, beautifully curated exhibition. I'm so glad most of you got to see what she did. I've decided to focus on just the Rafu work called Altered. And so if you're all ready, I'll share my screen. Go back one. All right, so I have selected translation as the title for the talk today. And there's a few reasons I have selected this. And first and foremost, it already came up talking with Barbara and Merle before all of you joined us, of just how that's what an artist does. An artist translates their experiences, emotions, feelings. Hold on, I'm just gonna minimize this so I can see what I'm doing. There. And so that's what I do. I translate into the visual whatever experiences and ideas I need to. So that's one reason. There's three reasons I chose translation. Hold on, figuring out how to do this through Zoom, how to advance the slides. I think I got it now. So the second reason is 15 years ago, I married into an Indian family. And so that means as a part of my everyday, I'm living in between. And as part of our everyday, there's some sort of translation that might be cultural translation, and then often is also language translation. So that's a part of my everyday existence. And you are just all such a wonderful group, and you all have your own experiences, and would love to hear at the end of the talk what, if any of you also find yourself living in between cultures and what that experience is for you. And then lastly, and this is the one that's the most important, and I will elaborate on this more later on in the talk, and that is that all of these altar series that are using the Rafu or the darned, translation has ended up being a key part of the process of making the work. And so again, I'll go into this later on, but what you see right here is my mother-in-law's hands, and she is speaking with a master Rafu artist, and they are discussing the work. So we're going to come back to this one. This is the most important reason for titling this translation. Now, you're such a sophisticated group, and so you have to forgive me if sometimes I'm a little too simple, but I always want to make sure that I'm carrying everybody along with me in the talk. So I want to take a moment to just clarify what I'm talking about when I say Rafu or darned. And this is also from experience. I found I've had conversations and then realized at the end of the conversation that it was unclear what I was describing. So this is one of the pieces that was in Betty's beautiful exhibition. And if you were in my studio with me, what I would do at this moment is flip it over and show you the backside to help illustrate what I'm talking about. So Rafu in English is darned. And so you can see here, I've cut a hole in the fabric, and then it's literally been rewoven. So just wanted to be clear on that point before we move forward. But I also wanted to make the point that I will use Rafu and darned interchangeably as I talk. And technically, we are talking about the same thing if we use Rafu or darned. But culturally, they mean something different. So if I say the work is darned, your response might be, my grandma taught me how to darn. I used to darn my socks. And it's something that's a bit of a lost skill here in the Western world now. And just because of the cost of labor, we don't seek to the outside to do it. And just because of inexpensive our clothes are, we don't take that time to redarn our socks anymore. So it's a bit of a lost craft here. In India, it's something that's a part of the yearly rhythm of life. In the fall, you pull out your woolens, you see where the moths have eaten away at it, and you bring it to the dry cleaner. And at every dry cleaner, there's a Rafu master who then will repair your clothes. And so this is very commonplace. This is something you do at least once a year is bring your clothes to have them repaired. So it's very much something that's living and alive and available and a part of living in India. I also wanted to clarify the point that I will often just say India, but just to be clear, my deeper knowledge and experience is all in northern India, in Delhi and in Punjab. And so this is a snap of the market where we used to live in Delhi, of the J block in Saket. And there was a dry cleaner in a Rafu we would visit there. So I'm going to bring you to 2012. Feels so long ago now. And in 2012, we relocated the family to live in Delhi, and we ended up being there for 1.5 years. And this is a sketch that the first week we were there, we were staying where the Fulbright had housed us while we looked for permanent housing, and it was right on the rooftop. And so every night I was doing these sketches of the rooftops that I was seeing. And it turns out I was doing a bit of foreshadowing, because this little structure right on top there ended up being very important to me during my time at Fulbright. And Betty is actually the one that found the term of them for me. So they're these rooftop dwellings, and they're, I might not say it right, Betty, Basati. And
I might not be saying it right either. I'm just based on having read it. So we need somebody who speaks Hindi to tell us if that's indeed the word.
It's called Barsati.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I put emphasis on the R. Barsati.
Barsati.
Barsati. So these barsatis are these rooftop dwellings that are on top of the structure of the house. And they might be because the family is growing and they need another room for the in-laws. It could be that they've decided to have help live with them and they want a place. Or it could actually actually be that they're trying to get some rental income, and they put those little houses on top. And so these little structures that are built after the main building was built, I became fascinated with them. Part of living in Delhi for that year and a half also involved frequent trips on the Grand Trunk Road between Delhi and Chandigarh. Chandigarh is where our family home is where my husband's parents are. And so we would go back and forth at least once a month, and it's a 5-hour drive. Doesn't matter if you take the train or drive, it's 5 hours. And I am never, ever, ever, ever going to drive in India. So I was always a passenger, and I would pass my time 2 ways. One was studying the alphabet and trying to get better at my Hindi, which shamefully, as I just experienced, I'm still not there. And then the other was to draw. And so this is from the sketchbooks, a really quick gestural drawing. And then this is also from the same time period of where you can see that I'm looking at those little structures outside the window on the rooftops, and I'm just extracting the shapes as we go by. So here's a few little sketches looking at those shapes. This one being the clearest one to recognize. And I'm sure this is a scene you all are very familiar with in your own trips to India, but just to show this is on a flyover looking out on those rooftops, and you can see these little forms that I was looking for as we would drive back and forth. So as you all know, just in India, you can see those visible changes that are happening to the structures. And so in this image here, you can see this little add-on making that porch a room. And then over here, this is in Shimla, you can find places where there's just generations of these alterations to the structure. So living in India, being a part of a Sikh family, of course, I'm still me, but I'm going through making these little alterations and adjustments to live there in India and to be a part of the family. And of course, the family is in turn making these adjustments to include me, which happens in every single marriage, of course, but it was heightened for us with that cultural difference. And so again, I was very attracted to these buildings where you have the structure's the same, and then these visible little alterations that are happening to make those adjustments and accommodate life moving forward. So all of this observation led to this series of work called Landscape Observed. And at the time when I started the Fulbright, I was working with cut paper and paper inlay. I'm trained in drawing and painting. And so what you're looking at here is a very thin rice paper with then this piece inlaid inside of it, which is a painted thicker paper. So they're simultaneously cut and then fused together like a puzzle, matching and becoming one surface. And you're gonna find throughout the talk that this is an issue I'm fixated with and very important to me, that it be one thing, where this isn't a collage where it's layered on top of it. It's one object in and of itself. It's fit together as a puzzle meant to be together, that there's not that layering in time that can happen with the collage. As a painter, I was very interested in just that difference of quality of paper, where you have the very thin rice paper, this really delicate feeling, with then this heavier painted paper on there. And here's another one in that series. So this is how all that observation was manifesting itself in my studio. For the Fulbright, my Fulbright was about the intersection of craft and contemporary art. And it was two-pronged. One was to interview different artists, artisans, people in the exhibition space, curators, art historians, and it was research in that sense. And then the other prong was to continue my own work and responding to where I was. And so that's this Landscape Observed happening at that time. And you can see I really was just soaking in my environment. Looking at these pictures, you can see how I was pulling from some of the colors that were around me. And this, my Fulbright still really interests me as far as artisans and fine art. And I think that that is, Alexander, I'm sorry I missed your talk because I think we overlap here. Where there is this intersection, but it's not like here in the US where it's almost like a done and dusted issue. In India, it's still very much separate, and the artisans are still not, in my opinion, getting the recognition that they deserve for their skills. So that's something I'd be happy to talk about later too. Putting together this talk and going through all these old images was a lot of fun for me as I prepared. And I was so fixated on those rooftop structures. But of course, this alteration was happening all around me. So this is just out our back balcony, you know, the house that we faced. So this was a young couple, they had a young kid, and the mother-in-law was gonna come live with them. And so
I'm surprised they gave her a window.
Notice it's a very high window though. Like look out the window.
And they're not finished yet.
So this is what I saw happening just out my bedroom window, was seeing this room be created. But then what I don't understand is why they also, I still never understood it, why the upper balcony also got destroyed in this process, because they didn't own that property. But anyway, they fixed it. All right, so as part of the Fulbright, and I mentioned I was interviewing, I got to meet Priya. And I'm wondering if any of you knew her. No? So
No, but I think she got Penelope's haircut.
Oh,
this was this
haircut.
she did. So this is Priya Mehra, and she lived there in Delhi. And she is a designer, textile artist. And in 2000, let me check my notes, I think it was in 2004, she started a project called Making the Invisible Visible, where she wanted to work with Rafu artists and making their work and their craft visible. Because like so many artisans and skilled folks, they're not usually given the recognition they deserve. And so she started researching them and did some research papers and started this project. She's such a generous woman. So to talk about the Rafu masters, if you are a Rafu master, you want to be able to have someone give you a pashmini shawl, you do the repair, and then they not be able to find even where that hole was. That's how good you want to be. And all of you who do have really nice shawls, probably they went through the hands of a Rafu master, because things don't always come off of the loom pristine. But none of us know that. It's something that's invisible. And she wanted to make that work visible. And so she started working with different Rafu masters and asking them to use different colored thread to show that repair that they were doing. And this is why she had the haircut. In 2005, shortly after starting this research, she was diagnosed with cancer for the first time. And so by the time I met her, it had been many years that she had been battling cancer. And this work that she was doing with the Rafu became this metaphor for her. So this quote is from the Indian Express, and those of you with experience know they don't always quote accurately. I know I've been misquoted by them, but this is something that she would say, so I trust it. So much like how they repair a cloth, we heal our bodies throughout our life. We have to keep mending and restoring it to help it go further and give it strength. So let's see, which slide do I have next? Yeah, another one. So Priya is such a generous person, and in just reviewing her life getting ready for this presentation, she reached out to so many people and just had a way of really making you feel at home when you came to her home. And she and I was supposed to interview her for like maybe an hour and a half. I ended up spending like, I think 5 hours at her house and having lunch. And we just kept talking about art and artisans, and, you know, it came together about agreeing that they should be recognized more and just really connected. But the main reason we connected is that I do have my own health issues. And here's a series of work I was just finishing up right when I started the Fulbright. It's called Black Hole. And if you can visualize hole being played with, where there's a W in parentheses in front of hole, so playing with hole and hole, and just thinking about the body's ability to rewire and repair itself. And so you can see what you're looking at in this series. So it's paper with ink spilled on it, and then these cutouts which are filled in with mylar. So yeah, thinking about the rerouting and repair of the body. And you can see how that correlates with some of the shapes that she was finding. And just, I think that's interesting that this idea of a wound and repair, how it takes a similar shape, even in these two different mediums and materials. So we connected, and Priya invited me to come work with her in her studio with this Rafu master, Navneet, who lives there in Delhi. And as a crazy artist, how we do this to ourselves sometimes is like, what am I doing? I'm not a textile artist. What am I gonna do? I like had a little panic attack. But of course, the best place to start is exactly where you are. So the first few visits, I worked with them for about 2 months. And the first few visits was also just me understanding what this Rafu process could do and then how I could use it. And so you can see that this is one of those black hole shapes that he's then reweaving, joining those two cloths together. And then here's one, you can see we were thinking and about what was possible. Yeah, putting those cloths out. So it was absolutely a gift to be there and work with Priya and Navneet. And so back to this idea of translation, I definitely needed Priya to help me with that translation and communicate what I wanted to say. And so here's one that Navneet did, and this was in the exhibition with Betty. And so you can see that there's the red and the white. And what Navneet did was very brilliant and technically incredibly skilled, where we took just the threads from one direction out, and then he filled it back in with the white. He truly is a master and is very skilled in what he does. He's been doing it for a long time. So again, so you can see the end result and then the process of him working. So very, very quickly, I realized that this way of working and using this technique was saying what I was trying to say with the cut paper, but so much better. Because with the cut paper, it's still like a puzzle that's put together, but this is actually rewoven, where at the end, that art object is one seamless object, all merged together. And I knew that I wanted to continue working this way. I just want to point out how it has this shadow of the pattern on there, and just keep that in mind. I'm going to talk about it again later. And then here's a close-up so that you can see that reweaving happening. And these two little guys talking together. So right at the time we were wrapping up working, I was wrapping up working in Priya's studio and getting ready to ship back to the US, I was completely sold on working this way, and knew at that time, what I knew is that I at least wanted to recreate landscape observed in this medium, and was very committed to doing that. But Priya was, her cancer had come back right at that same time. And I absolutely knew I couldn't burden her with that position of being the in-between translator for me anymore. And so it was talking to Jasmeet and his family, we decided that we would find someone to work with in Chandigarh. And my husband, before the pandemic, used to go back to India quite frequently. And so the idea is that he would be my translator and would help communicate that work. I myself used to normally go once a year, so that would keep this work going. So you can see this landscape observed, you know, now altered series that I knew that I wanted to finish. So we did find a Rafu master in Chandigarh so that I could complete this work. And I don't even remember how it happened, but my mother-in-law quickly stepped in to be that in-between person. And it has been a real pleasure to work with her and to have her be in that position, and has just added a whole another emotional level for me with this work, because it strengthened our relationship and just given us something to work on outside of the family. My mother-in-law is not from an art background. She doesn't really necessarily understand what I do or why I do, but she feels very strongly that women should have a vocation and a profession outside the home. So she's delighted to support me in doing this. And so to spend a moment just to, again, point out what the process is. So I would decide what that shape is, cut the shape out. And in terms of them working, so it's like 2012, we're now in 2013, and I'm still working on this project. But early on in 2013, 2014, I had to come up with a way to communicate, to translate for my mother-in-law what I wanted. And so I developed this way of drawing it out so that then she would know. And then you can see the threads are which colors it would be. So there's a lot of this process behind. Here's some of those shapes that I extracted from the dries, and you can see this one's pinned and ready for me to cut out. And then here they are talking. So I prepare my sketch, I prepare the piece, I then give it to my mother-in-law. We have a conversation either through FaceTime or in person, so she feels she understands it. She then meets with Monty, and they have these elaborate conversations that you can see here of just finalizing exactly what the color is going to be, making sure he understands what he's going to do. So we've already discussed that one level of translation that I have to do to make it so that she can be my translator to speak to him. And here's some of Monty's colors. So last time I was there, I did actually take like a little thread from all the ones I know I'd be interested in, so we could be more in sync about which colors to use. And so then here again is this little note that I make. And so then when my mother-in-law speaks with Monty, he has her write it in Hindi. He doesn't read Hindi. He doesn't read and write. And so what he does is he then, when he's ready to work on this, which is usually on a Sunday or his off times, he asks his children to read this to him to remind him what he's going to be doing. And so there you have all those different levels of translation that can go into this piece. And I really started to think of it and feel it as like an underpainting of what's behind each piece. And again, my own emotional investment in it through these relationships with my mother-in-law and Monty. What is the next slide? And here are some of those notes that go back and forth. And so they usually leave the notes attached. So then those notes come back to me. So here's a collection of all those notes, which I think are quite beautiful in and of themselves too. That back and forth. So to just take a moment to address working with Monty, because I often get asked, like, is this a collaboration? And no, not officially in my view. For me, it's more like if I was going to do a fine art print, and I would go work with, like Acorn Graphics, a fine art print shop, and I would have the ideas and the colors and what it's going to be, and that they would help me with the technical side. And so that's how I see it when working with Monty. I also get rightfully asked often, like, am I exploiting him? I do pay him good wages, a good, market wage for what he gets. And then I also be as respectful as I can be to his own working rhythm. So like, as I mentioned, it's a yearly thing. In the fall, you gather your woolens. So winter is a very busy time for him. And I never ask him to do any of this work in the winter. He has his other clients to keep happy. But in the summer, so I keep him busy in the spring, summer, and fall. And in the summer, he does go home to his village for a month. And he usually asks for quite a large parcel at that time, because then a way to support him while he's at home in his village, and comes back with, a whole stack, like 20 of them that he's done. Yeah, so just wanted to clarify, because those are two of my frequently asked questions about this body of work. So sometimes, so there's this big gap between when I'm sending the work and when I'm getting the work back. It can be 3 months, it can be as up to 6 months. One time it was even 9 months. And so by the time I'm getting it back, sometimes I don't even remember what I sent. I take little pictures to help jog my memory, but it's not fresh in my mind. So it's always a surprise. And this is an example of one where I was just absolutely thrilled. I am showing you my favorite piece out of all of the This is my favorite piece. I just love that blue on the red and the little one peeking up, that relationship between the two. So for this, I was very thrilled with what came back. Other times, like I did show this one to Betty in the studio, this is more of a neon orange, and I was going more for maybe a salmon mauve orange. So this one I wasn't quite thrilled with. But if it's a color or a shape issue, I never do ask Monty to redo it. I accept it as part of the chance and the process of working this way. There's only once we asked him to redo a piece, and he admitted that he hadn't done it. And we could just see he hadn't done it. It was like maybe he was trying to teach someone how to do it, and the quality just wasn't the same. So that's the only time we've asked him to redo a piece. Otherwise, however it comes back, I accept it. And if I'm not quite happy with it, sometimes I look at it and think, how can I alter it or change it, work back into it, maybe ask him to do another shape on the same piece, to bring it to that place where I am happy with it. And so here's the picture that Betty would have showed you at Alterations, Activation, and Abstraction. It was so great to see them all on the wall together. This particular series on the red fabric, there's more than what's seen here, but these are all the ones that are approximately the same size. And then there they all are together. So I want to take a second to take a drink of water first. And then to address how, with all of this, I'm using the found fabric. So this red fabric comes from a canopy. Those of you who know Delhi might know Sharma Farms, big warehouse-esque space with antiques and old stuff. And they have one room where they just have textiles dumped in. And so that's where I went when I was first trying to find fabric to work with. And I do like to work with the found fabric. It has an inherent history. It's bringing that layer to the piece. And in my opinion, makes that richer. And so this canopy, based on its shape and size, it was probably used to cover something important, maybe a family shrine, you know, who can know exactly. But it was this red fabric with then this black border around the side. And originally this was gold, but it's long worn away and just left with this staining or this gumminess. So when I asked you to pay attention to that stained part, so this bit of the red fabric was behind it, so it left the shadow or the stain on there.
Oh.
fabric also was just wonderful to work with because you can see all of these seams. That was in the upper canopy part. And this was a loved object before it ended up in a heap in Sharma Farms because it's actually darned red on red in quite a few places. And then you can see here, like this newer piece of fabric was spliced in and here. So again, I like working with fabric that already has a history of its own. So I'll now move to the aligned series, which then I had this beautiful black fabric that used to be the border and thought about what to do and how to work with this. So with these cypress trees that are here, though the body of work is called aligned, I was really playing with it being misaligned. You can see here just bringing those trees together in a different way. And as with all of the work, it was important to me that this wasn't a seam, that it was the two pieces sort of meeting and kissing each other, and then have this suture bring them together. And so this is the backside that you can see where that happens. You can see the two edges of the fabric coming together, and then the stitching there. And Monty is the one who worked with me on this series, and he has actually asked me never to ask him to do this again. And it is because I'm taking away that grid of the fabric, which makes it much more difficult to do because you're coming in at an angle here with it. So he found these ones quite challenging. There's another aligned, and here where it was particularly threadbare, I did ask him to fill that in, and then he did another little suture here to make that repair. So again, playing with how the lines meet, how the pattern meets, and just having them touch each other and be merged. We're now in 2016, and I have worked as a fabricator before, and one of the frustrations is when, you know, as to Monty's point here of I was like really challenging him, bringing things in outside of the grid. I think it's important to understand some of the process that you're asking others to do. So in 2016, I applied and received a residency at the Haystack Mountain School with the sheer purpose for 2 weeks to study darning and teach myself darning. So this is one of the pieces that came out of that time. Since I was doing the work and I was in America, I wanted to work, it was also 2016, I wanted to work with American fabric. And so this is an old quilt that's been taken apart. So here is by my own hand, learning how to darn. And I can do it, I have mastered it. I'm just a lot slower. So this series that happened after this on the squares of the American quilt, I either call it exchange or swap. So like this one's called exchange, where I've taken the threads here and then used it to repair this hole. And then likewise, I actually took the threads from the back hem there and then put them here. So you can see that some of that red and that green that's coming from this cloth here. So there's this exchange of the two. And then this one, sorry, the image of this one isn't so good, but this one's then called swap, where I've pulled out the threads of both of them and swapped them. So again, this whole talk, I'm going to mainly focus on the rafu and the darning, but I did want to just give a nod to what I'm currently working on in the studio, which came out of this work of actually learning how to darn and pushing that thread through. So in the studio, I've started these embedded thread drawings where I'm pushing the thread through the fabric to get that shape. Still working with the house shapes, but moving a little bit away from those actual sketches from Grand Trunk Road, looking more at the environment that I'm in now. This one's called Substrate, And it's a little nod of like, here would be your substrate of that structure, but it's just threads. It's not anything that's secure or solid. Sighing because like I didn't know what was going to come when I made this piece, and how having a strong foundation in all parts of life is so important. Here's another one of this embedded thread drawing. So again, these are current. These were just done last year. And so you can see what I'm doing here when I describe embedding that thread. Again, true to my purpose here of not wanting it to be embroidered on top of, under of, that I actually want it to be pushed through that fabric and becoming one with the fabric. This is a larger piece that I did last year. This is the size of a single bed cover. It used to wrap around a bed. So that gives you a sense of the size. I wanted to see what it was like to go big with this work. And here's a detail. And then again, seeing that the thread pushed through. But coming back around to darning, this is the oscillation series, and I'm not going to dwell here too long because admittedly they're really hard to look at, and that was part of the intent, was to play with the eye and to actually make you feel uncomfortable. The reason I was interested in working with this striped fabric, one of the reasons, was that whenever we do have an alteration or amend, of course there's tension that goes a part of that. And so the stripes help to show that and make that visible as this alteration pulls at them. Also, so looking at this backside with the pattern, I would not have been able to ask Monty to do this check or to do any kind of pattern in the first few years that we were working together. It really took building up that relationship and me being clearer in how I communicate, and he and my mother-in-law understanding more what I was after. So we were at a point that I could ask for this check and could get a little crazier with the designs. I'm sure some of you are familiar with American Sampler or, you know, Western European Sampler series from the 1800s, where there are really elaborate patterns that can happen in the darning. Of course, it's exactly like weaving. Anything you can do in weaving, you can do in darning. But it's just me learning how to ask him and him upping his skills to be able to do that. It's something he doesn't normally do. Normally it's just patching a sweater. So this is another from that series.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, good. So what I started to think about was how myself in drawing and painting, here I was working in almost a graphic way of just having these color silhouettes on the fabric, and how could I bring some of that illusionary depth that I enjoy getting out of painting out of this work with the raffia work. And so I wanted to show this one of starting to bring in that depth. And then that brings us to the current work that I'm doing right now with the raffia. So I have, if you think back to the landscape observed of that thin rice paper, it's now this thin white cloth, thinking of it as paper. And back again to Priya, thinking of the cloth as the body, I've always thought of the paper as like skin. So in the same way as the body. So returning to this really paper-esque cloth and thinking with the embedded thread drawings, thinking about the raffia as this repeated line is a drawing. It is a drawing that's in there. So having that illusion of the two tones of the shape. And so this is where I'm at right now with the raffia series. And currently there are works that are ready for me in Chandigarh, and I'm not sure when I'm going to be able to get them. So here's some of the sketches where I'm figuring out like maybe how dark or light I want it to be, what exactly the shape is. And here is my mother-in-law and I discussing. So she's showing me that these are works that are back now and are ready for me, but I'm not too sure when I will see them. Which another frequently asked question that I will preempt is, why don't we just use the mail? Why do we do these hand drop-offs of this work? And it's because I know my limits. I can ask my mother-in-law to watch my child, but I can't tell her what to feed him. And it's the same. She's happy to help me do this, but custom forms, post office, that's not, that would be asking too much. So I'm not sure when I'm going to get this. I think there's about 12 pieces ready for me, and I'm not sure when I'm going to get them back. So I'm almost towards the end of the talk. I wanted to bring it back around to Priya and the Fulbright. And Alan knows of this because he's also in this exhibition. And it was ready to go up right at the end of March. I'm going to show you the pages of the catalog. It was ready to go. And so what this is the Fulbright was celebrating 70 years. And they put together a beautiful exhibition, focusing on artists who, at their time at the Fulbright, that they're still continuing that work that they started, and that they're still working with the artists and have a relationship going on with India. And it is a beautiful catalog and a beautiful exhibition. Hopefully it can be seen in person someday, but right now we just have the catalog. And there's no new date put out yet for it to show. So the idea is that the artists who have these ongoing relationships, that they have their work alongside the work of their mentor or the person that they were collaborating with. And so here I did choose this series to put in. And these are like I let these be, these are the little color threads as far as it being called out. And I let them be as part of the history of the process. So sadly, we lost Priya in May of 2018. She fought cancer for a long time, but we lost her. But Threshold Art Gallery, the owner is her friend, and they agreed to have Priya's work in this exhibition, which I am just so grateful for and so happy that our work could be side by side. And so here's the other work of hers that will be included. So at the time when Priya invited me to come work at her studio, of course it's because we connected, but it was so much more than that. And part of that is that it was part of her mission. She wanted as many people to know about Rafu as she could. And she did many residencies, like one in Australia, one in Scotland, where she would focus on mending and on Rafu and just helping to educate people about this craft. And I'm not the only artist she also invited to come work. And just as a demonstration of her generosity, this is in 2017. So this was from an exhibition in Coach in 2017. And then alongside it, she did a 2-day workshop with Rafu masters, educating people and teaching them about Rafu. And so that was just part of her artistic statement, was to reach as many people as she could. And I am just so grateful that she did invite me to come work and that I could continue working in this way. So in 2018, she was also in the Kochi Biennial. I'm not sure if any of you made it to that one. This snap is actually courtesy of Sharia, who I know a lot of you've met. So he was able to be there for the exhibition and took this picture for me. And so it's so sad that she couldn't see her work at the Kochi Biennial herself, but I'm still so glad that she got this recognition and had this work there. So shortly after I came back to the States, she was having trouble with weaving, just with the fine motor skills, and your fingers start to not work as well with cancer. So she couldn't weave anymore. She was still continuing her Rafu work, but she started working with paper. And so what you're looking at here is some of her paper pieces where she's using those different pulps and embedding them together. And I love the room that they chose for her, where this, these same ragged shapes of having that peel away and needing to be repaired. And then in here too. This picture is from the catalog. And then this is the work that's behind, again, this paperwork with the embedded in it. So I have reached the end of the talk, and I am excited to have questions.
Fantastic.
Brava,
Oh my.
brava, brava, brava. Tanya, that was so wonderful. And I actually have a couple of questions. Am I on?
Yep.
Yes, you're on. I can hear you. Betty, I was thinking of you the whole time I put it together because you've seen all of that work.
Well, not all. So it's pretty exciting. I have a couple of questions. I guess one is a big general question, and that would be, did anything else come out of your Fulbright experience? Anything new that's percolating that you want to tell us about?
I wouldn't say it's actually new, but what ended up being the main focus that I wrote a paper and gave a presentation on at the end was the art of sanji. Do any of you know what that is? It's cut paper. And so this is a tradition that I didn't know about before I was there. And so there's a whole tradition of cut paper, and it's very vague, and I would love to go back and learn more just about that. So sometimes cut paper pieces are made as a form of worship and hang on the shrines. And then sometimes they're used as templates for using the colored rice to make the rangolis.
Mm-hmm.
And they're incredible.
Would these relate to the kinds of cut paper things that are done in China, those red paper, cut paper things? Have you ever seen those?
Yeah, I'm thinking, do they relate?
Or similar technique maybe, or?
It's a different technique.
Different technique.
In China, it's usually, you have a stack of them, just like you do in Mexico with the tradition of cut paper there. So you have a stack of them, and you have a sharp item and you hammer it in so that you're cutting many at one time and having multiples. In India with sanji, it is a one-off. And you, oh shoot, do I have them here? You use these special scissors, these that have just a really small end to it, to cut the work. And the sanji masters can cut just the smallest circle.
Wow.
It's,
oh, I'd love to see that.
Yeah.
So I took some notes. I have other questions, but I'll let someone else speak while I make my way through this.
I have a question, Tanya.
Yes, Carl.
When we were talking before a lot of other people signed on,
Yeah.
We talked about the effect or the impact of all of the isolation on your work. And you said that you took a chance that didn't feel as much like a chance as it would under normal times, but because everything is changing, your work has taken a totally different turn. And I wonder if you could preview a little bit of what that turn is.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And I think I got two replies to that. So yeah, I enjoyed having that conversation with you. And so what I was describing is once we were in lockdown and like all of life has changed, I took a pretty big risk in my work that I wouldn't have considered before. And that is that in working with those structures, I started to create them physically with balsa wood.
Oh, three-dimensional?
Yeah, three-dimensional. So with painted balsa wood, started to actually make the buildings that you saw some of those shapes of, and then filming them, videoing them, collapsing, which to turn to video as a medium and to work in the three-dimensional was not something I was contemplating before the pandemic and the lockdown.
Yeah,
but
that's huge.
Yeah, it's huge, but it, like I was sharing, it didn't feel, it felt like the right step, and it didn't feel as scary as it would have because everything's changed.
Sure.
So it like was giving me permission to work in a completely different way. But what I also, when you're asking that question, so that's like what I'm doing in my own studio. But as far as the Rafu work and continuing it, like this might be the end of working with Monty and my mother-in-law. I certainly cannot ask her to have contact with him right now, and vice versa. So I'm not even sure when I'm going to get back those last pieces from her. So that might be at an end for this particular series. But at the same time, and as putting together this presentation for you, I was feeling even stronger about this, that it's, we need mending, we need healing. And so I'm very committed to continuing doing this Rafu work in some form or other, but it might be, you know, it's going to take a different form, and I don't know what that form is yet. I'm just remembering there was a quote. Anyway, I'm not going to find it now. But just how, it's irreversible repair. How with the darning and the mending, it's this idea of bringing a repair to something that looks like it's damaged irreversibly. And so how that darning and the mending can bring a bit of hope of repair of all of our broken systems right now.
That's
So
great.
I gave you 2 answers on that, sorry.
Oh, it's good, it's good. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Sherry can go first. I'll wait.
No, go ahead, Selma.
Oh, I think just wanted to tell you, you asked about Barsati.
Yeah.
Many of the times, I'm from Calcutta, so not North India. Many of the times in Bengal, the Barsatis are used as prayer homes. They make it for puja.
Oh,
So
that's
it's separate from the rest of the house. We have one. We don't call it Barsati. We call it Chatir Ghar. So
Okay.
it's called God house, puja ghar. So we do prayer there. My grandmother used to go there every morning for prayer. So it's set aside for prayer. So no, it's separate from all the cooking, separate everything.
So it's like a clean space.
Exactly, way up on the top, so high above everything else. And then the other thing that I wanted to share, because I thought it was lovely how you said, the other thing was when you were showing the pictures of your mother-in-law and Monty, I thought it was lovely, that chair they had, it looked like it was woven. I'm sure it was accidental, but it just fit very well. It was like a weaving pattern on the chair, and it's such a common chair you see in India. But the mending you spoke of, and it showed, there's a thing, I'm sure you know this, it's called kintsugi, where in Japan, broken ceramics are healed together, and the healing is obvious.
Yeah.
And it's this lovely concept that if we don't hide, but show the repair work,
Yeah.
it becomes an adornment. So I thought it was so tied well with what you're doing. So that was very interesting.
The gold in the kintsugi.
Gold lacquer, yes, that's right. Kintsugi.
And I think that that's so important, and just the value and respect that that gives to the object, and not hiding the history, not hiding that it's broken or discarding it, but valuing it and repairing it in a way it's still useful.
That each repair is care, the most thing that you're putting in there. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that about Calcutta and the prayer. I didn't know that. I have visited Calcutta, but only for a few days. So what would have happened if I had been to Calcutta?
They're used for prayer houses. Some of them are used for, like you said, the servants or the maids to stay up there separate. But the majority of them are used. I'll try to see if I have a picture of ours from India.
Oh,
So my grandmother, that was her space. She went for prayers in the morning up there. Yeah, separate from everything else.
yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
Shari?
Okay. I'm glad you talked first, Selma, because my question goes to you as well. Tanya, initially you talked about the structures on top of the buildings, or whatever the use was, either for prayer or for living. Here in the States, a foundation has to be built so it can hold the eventual weight of another building story.
Oh,
So what I'm wondering is, were there any collapses? Did anything tragically collapse because of an additional story had the foundation not been created to hold it?
not to my knowledge, but I would not be surprised. There's not very many rules or rules followed.
I didn't think so. Thank you.
Tanya, I find it really, really interesting that you are embedding your vision rather than layering it. so that the shapes that you're exploring flow seamlessly, into what you had before. And it's, I mean, I think it's an artist's passion, to find a vision, but then to figure out where to place it and what to do with it. And I think that it's almost a metaphor for being able to weave yourself into the existing world.
Absolutely.
So it's really very exciting.
Thank you.
I have a very
Go ahead,
mundane,
Penelope.
I have a very mundane question, which I suppose could become metaphorical, but the materials that are candidates for Rafu, you started by mentioning that many of them were winter clothes that were wool that had been subject to moths, but it appears that there were other non-wool materials as well that you use. I don't know what your canopy was made of or some of the others, but I'm wondering what the criteria are for a material that can, in fact, even by a great master, be mended in this way.
A real Rafu master,
Yes.
probably mend anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Even silk or something like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely silk, because again, things come off the loom and they're not perfect. So even like those silk saris and shawls and stoles and things, those might have some repair in it. I mean, anywhere there's a weaving shop, there's also someone who's going to do those little finishing touches before they go to market. There's someone with that skill. So to clarify, I was bringing up the woolens because that's part of just the yearly cycle. Like if we lived in India, that's what we would do. We would pull out our woolens and we would bring some of them. So that's the most common everyday way that it's used in India. But if you have a blazer, if your shirt has a hole in it, you still would bring that in to have it repaired. In finding what I can work with the best, it does need for me to be a more open weave so that I can get that needle in there. So you could say a more inexperienced Rafu master would use something that's more woven, something like the silk that's a really tight silk. They're going to have a harder time with it.
As I asked it, I was thinking of your comment about our needing healing in the general sense, and as a metaphor of what each of us brings to this, that is what the material of us is, says something about how the healing can be done and what it takes to heal an individual. Thank you so much. That was wonderful.
Oh, you're welcome. But just in thinking of that same metaphor of what it takes to heal an individual, or in our case of our society with so much happening right now, sometimes it's also taken away. Maybe some of those threads that weren't put in right have to be taken out, and then we can replace and heal.
Great metaphor.
So,
thanks.
Tanya, I'm curious about two things. Well, I'll throw both questions out and you can answer them in any order you want.
Hi, Richard.
There's Tanya.
Hi, Richard.
all your friends are saying hi to you, Rich. So one is that last group has a lot of striped fabrics, the ones that were difficult and enchanting to look at. But they end up being kind of a lot of red, white, and blue. Was that deliberate?
Oh, that's a good question, because I actually noticed that after.
Oh.
I noticed that after the first few were made, but then I didn't fight it. So was it intentional? No, but I didn't go in and change anything after it was done.
Okay. And my other question is that the last time I was in your studio, are you in Hyde Park right now? Where are you?
Welcome to the transformed former guest bedroom.
Oh, so you're at home. Cool. That's so nice. You have an at-home studio.
It is very nice to have one. It's fully transformed, have a tarp up to keep the material in and everything. But Hyde Park has opened, but their internet isn't working. So that's why I'm taking
Yeah.
the call from here today.
Yeah. So when I was at your studio in Hyde Park, you and I were talking about your collaboration with another artist, Marsha,
Marsha,
the American who lives in Britain right now, and how you've been sending things back and forth to each other. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that project.
yeah. So with the embedded thread drawings, what I'm thinking about is for being precarious. And when I mentioned substructure, like just this precarious situation, and this was before we're in our situation now. I was already thinking of it as a precarious situation. And it's something that Marsha has been working on too. Marsha and I met when we were in our early 20s, and she now lives in London, and we've decided to do this collaboration together where we're shipping our materials that we work with back and forth and sharing forms and shapes. We have a WhatsApp thread going where we put the work and then we respond to each other's work. And a lot of energy and really exciting things are coming out of it. And it hasn't been rescheduled yet, so we're still on the calendar for next fall in 2021, being at the Milwaukee, in a group exhibition at the Milwaukee Design Institute up there.
Great. Oh,
Yeah.
good. Well, hopefully we'll all be able to go see it.
So I have used, when I talked about how sometimes the Rafu pieces come back and maybe I'm not quite thrilled with them, I am taking some of those and asking her to manipulate them, or I'm continuing to manipulate them. So treating them instead of precious objects like I was before as something that can be manipulated and altered even more.
Well, that's kind of wonderful that your quote unquote rejects, your Rafu rejects are being used, because that's a form of Rafu or darning or the kind of industriousness we see in India, particularly. Yeah. I remember in one hotel on my first trip, the woman I was sharing a room with, her hairdryer blew out because she was not using the right transformer, or the system couldn't handle it. And she left it in the room as we were leaving. And somebody came running after us. We had to sign a release because he was going to take it home and repair it. Mm-hmm. That whole idea of repair and reuse.
And use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it also occurs to me as you're talking about this, that if something comes back from India and you want to continue working on it, that's also analogous to the healing process, because the healing process isn't necessarily a straight line. Yeah. And sometimes you have to evaluate and redo.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tanya, yeah. I also like the metaphor of your mother-in-law.
Love that.
Being your advocate there, and then almost at the same time you were talking about that, you were very clear that your work with the Rafu Masters was not a collaboration, but it seems that with your mother-in-law it is. It's sort of finding that non-collaged, same, fusing together so it's not like this or like this, but meeting up.
Absolutely.
And you talked about that as the as living in the in-between, and that darning fills in the in-between, and that sort of in-between between Chandigarh and Chicago and a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law is filling in through this project, which is another.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a shawl that show my mouth dropped open, the turquoise.
Yeah.
And which is the reaction one always wants one wears something. But when I got it home, I held it up to the light and there were tiny little holes. So I got in touch with my dealer. I sent it back. It was repaired, and you can't tell there was a hole anywhere in it. I'm going to go look at it and study it now with more knowledge. So thank you for that gift.
I like your choice of words also. When you said a WhatsApp thread, it's almost innocuous, but the WhatsApp thread with you and your friend, the seamless way you do where it's full of seams. It's kind of funny. It's in a charming sort of way. I like that a lot. And your jamevar Barbara, it's because it was authentic and it had holes. That's because it was handmade. Those things aren't just a shawl, they're heirlooms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is jaw-droppingly
It's a
beautiful.
particularly gorgeous
Yeah.
one. So, Alexander, you go back and forth from India. Hello.
Mhm.
You know,
Alex.
Mhm.
do you consider that a collaboration or more what Tanya's describing?
I think there's a collaboration. I mean, Riaz and I think of him as my teacher, and he thinks of me as his
Okay.
teacher. I mean, in art parlance, it's essentially commissioned work, and that's partly to do with the kind of the economic structure that, you know, in this respect, Tanya is commissioning work to be done and is paying. And I think in a true collaboration, there's an equal risk involved, and there's a co-determination about how the work is presented. So if the work I did was really truly collaborative, Riaz probably wouldn't get paid until work was sold and so on. And I think he, certainly at the beginning, would not have been willing to take that risk. But essentially, I do think it's collaborative, you know, even though it isn't technically so. Yeah, going back some to the language, I was interested, Tanya, that you used the word suture, which is kind of like a medical term, but you also used the word splice, I think a few sentences before, which is a kind of an editing term with film. And I think so much of the work, it's so kind of redolent of different forms of different metaphors that you could kind of take it in so many directions. But also the other thing I was kind of interested in was translation. And this goes back a little bit to the collaboration, is that I'm assuming that every time something reaches you, there is still an element of surprise.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And is that kind of a welcome part of it?
Absolutely. Yes. It's very welcome.
Right. Because in a way, you don't really want to have too much control over it. You want
I like that element of chance.
Yeah.
Yeah, of not having complete control over the process and having that chance. And again, sometimes it comes back better than I ever could have imagined.
And is that in terms of the shapes that have been produced, or is it the colors and the textures, or?
I think it's more the colors and the textures and maybe how tightly or loosely he decides to reweave it, because the shape, I already pretty much know what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had to learn my limits. Sorry, Zima.
Because you were speaking of language, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was looking up the right spelling for this. So when you say suture, when you stitch, right?
Yeah.
S-U-T-R-E?
No. S-U-T-U-R-E.
Okay, S-U-T-U-R-E, right?
Suture.
Suture. Very similarly, the Indian word for sutra, like a river sutra, like the story that was written by Gita Mehta. Sutra means a running of thread. It's a thread of connection. So the work that Betty said, you and your mother-in-law, it's almost like a sutra, inheritance of work going through. That's a word that might be used, that it runs well with your idea of translation, S-U-T-R-E. It's the thread that connects throughout.
Cool.
Interesting. Tanya, you began by speaking of the artisans versus the artists in terms of who gets the kudos and the credit. I'm interested in, is there any gender difference, or are equal numbers of men and women master or mistresses of this skill, the rafu?
Of Rafu, it's all men.
All men.
Yeah.
All men.
Now, that doesn't mean
And your artisans, the one you work with, Alexander, as I recall, was a man. Is that all men as well?
There are women who work in the studios. There's certain kind of balance you have to keep between women coming into someone else's house, because it's quite a kind of traditional Islamic family. As I understand it, a lot of the needlework is actually done by Muslim
Exactly.
men as well. Is that true with this?
Yeah. So that's what I started to say. It doesn't mean that the women don't know how to do it. I think that often, you know, a Rafu might come take the work from your home, take it to his home. The whole family might work on it, but he's going to be that public face that then brings it back to you. And it's because the women it would be inappropriate for them to visit a stranger's home.
Now, as we have been seeing in this Salon series, at least now there are women who are artists and who are getting credit as artists. I'm just interested if there's any gender break in either way in this dichotomy between artists and artisans.
So when you first asked the question, my mind was just flooding. I wasn't actually thinking of it as first, just in terms of Rafu. So to just reiterate, for Rafu, it's mainly men. It is usually a Muslim background behind. Monty himself isn't Muslim, but that's the tradition. So it is, you're also sitting at a dry cleaner, you're conversing with other people. So that's inappropriate for a woman to do. But it really depends on what the tradition and the craft is. Because there are some painting traditions that are more, there's more women involved. Or like with the applique and some of the textile traditions, it is more women. But they still will usually have a man who's at the front.
As the front person.
Yeah, to help with that.
I think that if you look at textile art in the United States and in Europe, it's highly dominated by women.
Yeah.
Yes.
You go to the catalog at the Art
in the
Institute
United
and look at their
States.
collection of modern textiles. You're going to see very few male names there.
Yes.
So like with the Sanji, the
Interesting.
paper that I mentioned, that's also all dominated by men. I only met one female Sanji artist, and she was young, and she was more using it as an artist, where she's trained in graphic design, and she's decided that working with Sanji and the cut paper is going to be her medium, and she can express herself in it. So she wasn't coming out of a tradition or family that was doing Sanji.
What did they use Sanji for?
So if you can think of like with Krishna at certain times of the year, forgive me, I'm not going to know the names of the celebrations, that there would be like over 14 days, and you would come and you would make the rangoli of the different scenes. So that's how the cut paper is used today for those, for worship. But then there's also a tradition of just using those cut papers themselves and also having them up and around the temples.
Okay. So the reason I ask is, I'm sure you probably know this.
I might not.
No. There's a whole very well-established website, International Dunhuang Project, IDP, for the grottos in China. They're very well documented. They are, because of one of my presentations I did earlier, lots and lots of examples from, I think, 4th through 9th century of cut paper that was used in those grottos to put up on the walls for decoration of these Buddhist shrines.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the same form that's been passed down, maybe the same thing of cutting down paper. There were many examples of cut flowers in these caves that is well preserved in the, how do you say it, in the online. You can see all of them, cut flowers stuck on the wall, very probably similar to what they do in, what is it called, by Myanmar, where you put gold leaf cuttings on the wall for decoration. So you'll see samples of them online, idp.org, idp.com, International Dunhuang Project. Many cut crepe paper flowers that was stuck on the caves there.
So it's very exciting. So I haven't, this is something that I would like to do more research on, because sometimes, just like at our J Block market, there was a little shrine just in the middle of the market, you know, just one of those that happens by the side of the street, you know?
Thundering out there.
Yeah, it is. And they had all of these beautiful cut papers decorating the shrine, but yet it just sort of happened. Nobody can really talk to me about it. So it's in Matra is where the Sanji artists are, and that's where I went to go study and learn about them. But then I'm learning that in every state, as it usually is, that there's some form of cut paper that just isn't talked about that much. It just is something you do as a form of worship.
Oh, wow.
So thank you for that. I'm going to look that up.
Tanya, when you're doing your weavings or the repair work, Rafu, how do you decide on the shapes?
For which ones? For any of them?
When you have the red fabrics and there are two different on them, how do you decide on the shapes?
So I have these sheets of paper where I have all of my extracted shapes, and I will actually just cut one out and play with the size of it and the placement of it, because no matter what I do, I'm still coming at it as a painter. And so thinking about where the placement of it is, does that shape fit with the fabric, with the seam that's in there? So I'm looking at all of those different relationships. So it's really trial and error that I decide which one. Yeah, so I have all of these little cut shapes out. And then, yeah, and I use tracing paper. So sometimes I decide, oh, it needs to be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So I just quickly, enlarge it and see, is that going to work? Is that going to fit? And I think that that's also part of the surprise when I do get them back, because I'm envisioning it and envisioning those proportions. But of course, it goes through that transformation and when it's actually the material of the thread.
Tanya, have you seen examples of pounced drawings?
Yes.
Where because there's some similarity where the holes are really kind of integrated into the paper, and the drawing is literally kind of embedded in the paper.
Yeah.
Is everyone else familiar with those, with the tracings where they pounce the drawings? They're really very, very beautiful. I'll try and post some examples.
I think the Art Institute might have one in their collection with their Indian paintings. They may have one that still has all the little holes in it.
So basically they'll make the drawing, the artist will make a drawing, and then using a pin will trace along that line, and then you put the paper onto something else, and you basically push some, it could either be zinc powder or it could be like kohol, soot. And then as you remove the paper, it leaves the outline. And that's how during the Renaissance, that's how they would have traced images then too.
They did that in the Indian ateliers as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's spelled pounce, P-O-U-N-C-E.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's the pounce, I think, is the actual like sack of coal dust that you pound on top of the paper that has the holes in it, which becomes a kind of stencil.
That's an example.
How is everybody? Doing a quick check.
Mm-hmm.
We're fine. We're gonna have to go.
Hope we get to get that exhibit in
Well,
Delhi.
that'll be exciting.
We have to go, I'm afraid. So that was wonderful.
That was very interesting.
I actually have all sorts of comments to make to you about your technique of the line drawings with the warp and the weft, and how it reminded me of lazy lines in Navajo carpets, the diagonals, but I didn't want to, everything to me comes back to carpet weaving, so I didn't want to bore everybody with this, but
I almost put in an image of the repair of an old carpet.
Okay, because that really is a lot of what you were doing there, except it's so fine you couldn't go through every weft thread. You had to skip some. Okay, but anyway, goodbye everybody. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Jack, you must know about the New Mexico carpet auction.
Thank you.
The New Mexico Museum carpet sale ARC auction, which is going on now.
Oh, didn't know anything about it.
You want to know about it?
Yeah, send me a link or something.
Okay.
Okay, Penelope, thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, Jack. Bye, Michael.
Thank
you, Tanya.
That was marvelous.
Tanya, let's you and I talk soon.
Yes.
I miss you.
You too.
Alexander, these pictures are great.
Okay, I'll send you some more. I've got a whole collection of them.
Yeah,
So,
they're lovely.
Yeah, these are
so
beautiful.
when you see them on one side, you really just see the traced outline, and on the other side, it gets quite kind of mixed in with the color. But
I'm going to have to sign off. I've got to go to my granddaughter's going to be 20. She's leaving teenage, and we're having a Zoom party. So
Anyway,
Happy
love
birthday.
you all.
Thank you, Betty.
bye,
Thanks for
everybody.
organizing this.
Oh, whoever's in
Thank
Chicago,
you
does
so
anyone?
much.
Never mind. We'll chat later.
Okay, bye all.
Bye.